All right. Thanks for being here. Bill Williams, writer, photographer, producer. I think there's some financial world in there too. What kind of laws did you lobby for to help independent producers?
Well, basically, we had a situation when we were working with the federal government that the federal government could take forever to pay. And so one of the laws that we got passed was the Prompt Payment Act of 1984. When I was up on Capitol Hill talking to Congress, one of the things I was able to show them was an invoice that I had sent to one of the federal agencies. It took them 18 months to pay, and when they finally got around to it, they took the prompt payment discount, which was not terribly
Nice.
pleasing. And
Yeah.
so the new law says you have to pay on time, and if you don't pay, you have to pay a penalty. So that was quite a change for the federal government. And another one was the Copyright Act of 1984. So working on that.
How long is a copyright good for on that one? Is it 20 years or does it go longer than that?
I believe it's 50 years.
50. Okay. I know Disney had one that was 100 years on things. And then in some other stuff, 20 years is like I think for chemistry and things is 20 years. So that copyright covers broadcast or shows, or how does that get worded to be able to say this is what it covers?
Boy, going back in history there, and my brain doesn't work well that far back, but basically it was 50 years, and for videotapes, for video productions, for films, and printed material too. I believe it
Okay.
was 52 years is a typical time for that, but don't quote me on that because it could have changed a dozen times since then.
Yeah, no doubt. So then you go from all of that stuff to then investing or investment advising. How long are you still doing that, or was that just a
I
thing
am
at the
still
end of
doing
the
that,
effort?
although I'll be wrapping it up pretty quickly. But the real reason is that I started as a photographer and a writer and film TV person, and I loved it. It was doing very well, but I got tired when discovered that Kodak was going out of business. Okay, and so all the film, you don't have film anymore. I love darkroom work. Gee
Mm.
whiz, and video was changing to where I knew a couple of producers that had to change all of their equipment and eventually went out of business simply because they couldn't afford the payments on the new stuff. So I said, do I really want to keep going with this? And at the same time, I became a father living in Washington, D.C. I had grown up on a military basis all my life. I went to 14 schools before I got out of high school and never had a hometown. And I really wanted my daughters to have a hometown and be around relatives, have aunts and uncles and cousins that they knew. And so my wife had a brother and a sister who lived in Northwest Ohio, which is where I had been before I went to Washington. And so we moved back there so that the family could actually have a hometown. And when I got to Northwest Ohio, there wasn't a lot of demand for film and television producers. So I changed careers and got into financial planning. Thought I was going to hate it, but turned out I loved it and was really pretty good at it. It's now been 14 years. No, 32 years that I've been at it. But with the book coming
Gracious.
out or the book being out, I plan to be spending a lot of time on the road with that. And so I've given my notice to most of my clients that, by the end of the year, I'll be out of financial planning.
What's your thoughts on annuities?
Well, an annuity is simply a product by an insurance company that either is fixed, where they give you a guaranteed amount like a CD, or a variable, which is basically mutual funds offered by an insurance company, or not by an insurance company, but through an insurance company. And the third type right now is an indexed annuity, where the money is invested in an index so that it goes up when the market goes up, but it never goes down. So basically, an annuity is just a type of savings vehicle primarily for retirement.
But what's your thoughts on it? Like, do you like them or do you not like them?
Well, it depends on what the annuity is. Do I like this car or that car? Some cars are great. Some cars are really, I wouldn't go out and buy a Model T. Annuities are not good or bad in and of themselves. They're what they are being used for. Okay. Because you can do the same things without an annuity, but without the guarantees that an annuity provides. Because, for example, if somebody just wanted to invest in mutual funds, you can do that and not do it through an annuity. Or you can go and find an annuity that offers the mutual funds that you want to have. And then that annuity can also provide a guarantee of a lifetime payout, even if the funds all disappear in terms of value. So it is a retirement product with the intention of being used for retirement purposes.
I
Now, we
found,
had a real bad reputation for many, many, many years. And the
mm,
reason being there was only one type of an annuity, and that was a single payment fixed annuity, where if you wanted to put $250,000 into the annuity, you could do that and it would guarantee a lifetime payout. But if you died a month later, the insurance company got to keep the money. Those have gone away. Those don't exist anymore. But that's where annuities got the bad rap.
yeah, it's interesting when you can tell a lot by how a person talks about annuities. That's my experience, but I mean,
You're absolutely right.
everybody might not feel the same. All right. Photography then. So you started out photography or journalism, or did you know you wanted to do journalism and photography was a way to do that?
Boy, what a story. My whole goal in life was to be an aeronautical engineer. Okay.
Mm.
And so I started college in the engineering school and I needed a part-time job. And so somebody that I knew who had a job as a photographer said, "Hey, you were in the camera club at high school. Would you like a job as a photographer?" And I said, "Well, I don't have that much experience." He said, "Well, I'll get you a job because I need to get a job with the local paper and I can't do it until I get somebody to replace me." So I went out and was hired. And for some reason, the guy who hired me saw some future in me because he didn't fire me right away because I had no experience. I had to go out and buy every book I could find on photography and darkroom work. The person who hired me took me downstairs into the darkroom and said, "This is the developer. This is the stop bath. This is the fix. Here's the dryer. Bye. I'm gone." That was all I knew. And really spent most of the first year in the darkroom just learning the tricks of the trade. And it was a good job. I made all of 75 cents an hour. Hey, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And as far as writing goes, well, part of the job with the public information office, which is what I was at Texas Tech, I had to write some stories. And within 2 years, I was actually a staff photographer and a staff writer for the local newspaper. And then I was decided I really didn't like math, so engineering wasn't really a good job for me.
Mm.
So I started changing careers, and I changed careers to this, and I changed careers to that, and I changed not careers, but majors. And after about 5 years as an undergraduate, I was sitting in a union with a friend from the faculty, and he said, "I was looking at your transcript, and you have enough hours to graduate next semester." And I jumped up, grabbed him by the shirt collar, and said, "Great, in what?" And he said, "Well, if you take 3 more classes in speech, you can graduate as a speech major." Well, the broadcasting department was in the speech department, and I was already working on the radio station. So I said, "Okay, I'll be a broadcasting major." And worked out that happened. And then when I got out and moved out to didn't move, but I took a trip out to California to make my fortune and didn't make my fortune. I came back and went to grad school and got a master's in both broadcasting and journalism. And that's where my career took me for the next 30 years.
Were the speech classes like how to write a speech, how to give a speech, public speaking, how to teach people how to talk? What kind of speech class do you have if you're taking 3 speech
All of the
courses?
above. Okay.
Mm.
I taught classes in public speaking for business and professional people, oral interpretation, how to really make what you're saying uh, effective to the listener, broadcast speaking, how to, talk on a broadcast with the microphone that you're using right there. I mean, there are ways of using it. I've got one right here. But then it was also the theater department was in there. So we worked with the theater department. It was also part of the department was hearing audiology, and
Okay.
broadcasting was part of it. And I was the first master's degree awarded in broadcasting at Texas Tech back in 1965.
Wow. One of the first classes I took in college was a speech class, and it was an elective, and it was just public speaking. And it was one of the most useful classes I can remember. Like it was a short class. I think it was 1 credit, and the professor would sit in the back of the room. He'd explain how you're going to do a 5-minute speech on whatever. And that's what the class was 5-minute speeches on different topics. And he would sit in the back of the room. And if anybody said, or had a pause in what they were saying, he would yell pause, or not yell it, but just say it. And then if you said, he would say, So it was just for that alone made it easier, or it was a great class because of that. Because how often are you going to have somebody that gives you that immediate feedback? And then after that, going through the academy and other whatever public speaking places, I would see other people taking classes or whatever. And when they started doing the thinking words or the uhs, then it was distracting because I would just start counting those instead of listening to the class. And then on the evaluation, because most of them had like a teacher evaluation at the end of it, and you could fill it out, and I would just have, you said 54 times in 15 minutes. So just trying to keep that feedback going on from Professor Fugit in J. Sergeant Reynolds' speech class back in the day. But what a good class.
It's something that everybody should take regardless of what you plan to do with your life. You should be able to get in front of an audience and actually talk intelligently. And so many people can't, including people whose jobs are talking to people and trying to be intelligent, and it doesn't necessarily work. You see that in Washington a lot.
It'd be a good class, like a driving school, where you get caught speeding or doing whatever, and they send you to driving school. If you get caught doing a bad speech, you get sent to speech or public speaking class, and you just have 12 hours of public speaking training. That'd be a good idea.
Certainly wouldn't be a bad problem to have or a bad thing to have.
So then with photography, how well does that transfer over, that eye for photography, to broadcasting? Like if you're doing production on a news show, how much do you think about this type of shot versus this type? Did you have a preference, or was it the story first or the visual and the story?
Well, it's got to be the story, as far as news goes. Quite frankly, I didn't do any TV news. Where I was in charge of instructional television at a couple of universities where we had to put the programs together that taught, not public speaking, but chemistry, or taught 20th century Spanish literature or music appreciation. And so we had to use camera work that would illustrate what was being said. And that was interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed it, did a lot of it, several hundred programs under my belt in that regard. The photography comes into play in broadcasting for a cameraman to know how a shot should look, and for the director to know what he needs to be able to show, and to be able to tell the cameraman what to do and how to do it. And all too often I see, when I'm looking at television, I think, boy, that guy doesn't have a clue as to what's going on, how to frame a shot so that a person is not walking out of a picture, or as looking into a picture as they should be. The picture that I have of you right now is very well uh, formatted because you are looking into the frame, and I am in the same situation, looking towards the center of the frame. Actually, I'm looking towards you, but facing
Mhm.
towards the center of the frame. But if I were over here or over there, that's not where you'd want to be.
Yeah, it's with the podcast setup. I do think often about, do you want to look at the camera when you talk to the person and have this eye to eye contact that you might not have in real life? Or are you talking to the camera, which is not the person you're talking to, but the person who's either watching or listening to this? And then I decided on this setup where you have the over the shoulder camera that is like the other person that's listening to this or watching this right now is this camera, like they're sitting at the table with us. So
Mhm.
you're, I'm looking across a table at you, but the camera is not your eyes. The camera's up here. So if you were to say something strange about annuities, I could look at the camera and be like, okay, this is a strange guy about annuities. And so you have that effect of, breaking that, what do they call that? The fourth wall or whatever it is.
Right, right.
And then this camera has the view of you're in the conversation, so they can see you and they can see me, but it's like they're sitting at the table too. So that's what I was going with this setup. But it is the thing, those things you don't think about until you get a camera, you're taking a picture of something or recording something, that you start to wonder, okay, what's the best way to experience whatever it is you're experiencing in real life? Because a camera is always going to fall short of that. I think that if you go to the Grand Canyon and take a picture of it, you can show that to somebody and they go, "Oh, okay." But if you're there, it's
A
much
whole
different.
different experience.
Yeah. So it's how well can you get that, even with a pan shot or an extended frame? I don't think you're never gonna get it, but there's a lot to think about with photography and film that I hadn't thought about before I started doing things like this. Is that similar to your getting into photography and developing an eye for it?
Yeah, it really is because, like I said, I had to spend the first year, most of my time in the darkroom, working with other people's pictures and trying to make the other people's pictures look good in the darkroom. And I got to be a pretty darn good uh, darkroom technician, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And that's one of the reasons I got out of it because, well, gee whiz, we don't have film to use anymore, and the darkroom supplies are not going to be around because the supply or the producers are out of business, and you don't need a dark room with the phone that you have. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, well, that phone that I just held up is a better TV camera and a better still camera for that matter than my last experience at a TV station. I had to buy a new color camera, cost like $250,000 and weighed 400 pounds. And that little cell phone right now took better pictures than that 400-pound color TV camera. And the world has changed. It's not the way it used to be.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Although I do see a resurgence of people taking regular pictures and wanting to develop them. I'm not sure where they're getting the film or if there's companies that still make 35 millimeter or whatever would be the popular one. You see a lot of little cameras, digital cameras now that they make with a simpler lens to make it look like an old camera. So you get that feel of the softness on the picture. And you can also have things you can put on your cell phone to make it look like that. But then there's the same people that are probably still buying albums are then getting back into the old cameras. And there has to be some company somewhere that's still making the 35 millimeter film. But
I'm sure it's out there, okay, but you certainly don't have the variety of films that used to be available. black and white, for example, you had all sorts of very fine grain or very high speed, which are just the opposite in terms of quality. You had color negative, you had color transparency, and you had different sizes. I shot cameras from as small as a half frame 35 millimeter to an 8x10 view camera. Okay.
Wow.
Now, an 8x10 piece of negative, that's a huge thing, and you can get lots of detail in that. And a little bitty half frame 35 millimeter, well, you could almost tell what the picture was of.
Yeah. I think one of my first experiences on understanding the difference in photography speed and film was going to it was, I think the very first time was at a state fair and we were watching a tractor pull and I was taking pictures of that and then saw how they came out. And then later was like a monster truck show in the Richmond Coliseum where I took pictures of it and they looked like now you would look at it and go, well, that looks pretty cool. That's a good effect. But then you're like, I took these pictures. I waited all this time to get the film developed. And it was either in 12s or 24s on 35 millimeter, single prints or double prints, whatever. And you get the little pack of negatives in there with them. And then you're like, man, all of this time, I thought I had this great picture and it's just blurry. So then my dad was into photography when he's an architect, was into photography in college as well, doing the developing and all that. And he had a lot of that equipment at home, darkroom set up, all that. But I had more appreciation for it. And then when I went to the academy, the State Police Academy in Virginia, and we were learning how to take photos of crime scenes or crashes or whatever, they gave us the Nikon. It might not have been a Nikon. Maybe I'm just thinking because of the Paul Simon song.
Yeah.
maybe it was a Nikon, the 35 millimeter. And we had this whole class on f-stop and apertures and all this stuff. It was probably an 8 to 16 hour class on photography because we had a few of them. And we'd have to go out and take pictures and then they'd get developed and then we'd see what it was. And I remember thinking, this is going to be terrible if you're taking important pictures of something, whether it's evidence or whatever you're taking pictures of, and then they're not coming out, but you don't know it until weeks later that, I mean, we're required at a crash scene, a fatality or whatever, you take pictures at every point of the dial around it. So you're walking around the crash, taking pictures. So you end up with 5 or 6 rolls of film for a crash. And then I always was like, well, maybe I should take 5 or 6 more rolls just to make sure in case these don't come out. And
don't send them all to the same place for processing.
Yeah, they go all to the state police place to process it. We sent them all back to Richmond, to Chesterfield, to get them developed. But it's when they came out with the 35 millimeter cameras, I was like, well, let me get a small auto 35 millimeter, and then at least I know I'm not going to mess up. I'll still take it with this fancy camera and the flash and all that, but I'm also going to take a couple rolls with this little point and shoot one. So I take out a little bit of operator error. And then I remember getting my first digital camera that wasn't for work. I bought it on my own because I would still take the big camera, the small 35 millimeter, and then I would take the digital one, which probably like on 1 megapixel back then. And I was like, I'm going to get this covered in case we, something doesn't get developed. And now I don't think they have just digital cameras now, which is great for that type of work. But yeah, it was something learning about all the different technical sides of just still photography. And I never got into the big 400-pound news cameras of, video ones, but was it as complicated on that as it was on a regular camera where there is many adjustments?
Well, when you got into television, it wasn't just your camera, but the camera had a whole system, which included an engineer who was sitting back making the modifications to make sure the lighting was correct and make sure all the adjustments were there. And if something were going wrong, he could fix it on the go. so that, when you were in a studio, the cameraman pointed and, was responsible for what the picture looked like in terms of framing and all, but the actual quality of the picture was the responsibility for the engineer who was in another room, controlling the color, controlling the black and white levels. Now, today they don't have that. I mean, last time I looked around, the cameras were out there and it was all automatic. The cameras adjusted themselves. They didn't have to worry about it because we knew we were going to have a good picture because the camera knew. On the other hand, it takes a lot of the ability to make creative adjustments out of your hands, because in many cases, you can't do some of the creative things because the automatic will override it.
Hmm. Yeah, I know in the iPhone you can go in and adjust all that stuff, but I think in college they had some classes on how to take pictures with an iPhone, but then I always thought, let me just go with the standard iPhone setup or whatever phone it is. Hmm. Do you take a lot of pictures now?
I take very, very few pictures now. It's one of those things I don't even think about it, because when I was active in it, I was always looking for not only a good picture, but in the back of my mind is, where could I sell this? Okay.
Mhm.
And when I got out of it, wow, I don't have to have that thought in mind at all because I'm not going to sell it. And now with a cell phone, uh, I don't even know if I could sell it. It's
Oh,
just not a part of my life anymore.
okay. With your writing, did that develop along with the broadcasting and photography side of things, or were you writing before all of that?
Well, yes and no. Okay, how's that for a good answer?
Mm.
Uh, I started writing because when I was working for the paper, any picture we had to have a cut line or a caption. So we had to write those. And that sort of expanded into, well, write a story. Well, okay, we can do that. Working for the Public Information Office, we had to do news releases. This so and so is happening at the university. So I was doing that. It was a hired gun. And when I moved to Washington, D.C., uh, I was hiring a lot of writers. Okay. I was hiring a lot of writers for the films that I was doing. And I remember one client who is still a good friend of mine 50 years later. Uh, we were looking at a film or project, and I said, let's talk about who we would write or who we would hire to write the script. And he said, Bill, you write it, because I've known you long enough that no matter who we get to write it, you're going to rewrite it the way you want it. I said, oh, okay. So I started writing. I wound up as a member of the Writers Guild for film writing, and have written a bunch of films. They're not things that you would ever really want to see, like servicing the gun sight on an F-111 or
Oh,
how to repair the self-service postal center, things of that nature. But hey, you have to have scripts for things like that. I did stuff for the Red Cross on how to recruit blood donors. Well, you name it, and it's out there. And I was the hired gun that did the writing for it.
when you do a script for that, do you have to research the topic, or do they give you the information and then you just take it and make a script out of the information they give you?
It all depends on the client and what they're trying to accomplish. For the Navy, for example, they wanted me to write a script on a guest. I'm trying to think of the terminology. They had a program where they would invite special, very important people to take a cruise on a Navy ship, and they needed a script on to tell what it was all about. To do that, I had to take a cruise on a Navy ship. And so I wound up in the middle of the worst storm in the North Atlantic on a small guided missile cruiser, which was, shall we say, an experience, and put that together into a script on what it's like to take a Navy cruise. On another one, They had, well, the government had a really great program called the Government Industry Data Exchange Program. And all they knew was that they needed a script on all the different types of information that went into GUIDEP, which is what they called it. And to do that, I wound up traveling all over the US to visit different industries and different situations to find out what they were doing and how they were doing it. And I was in Long Island, I was in California, I was in Texas, I was at the Kennedy Space Center, I was all over the place, just having to do the research to find out what I needed to write about.
For your script writing, then, are you writing into like an industry standard of what's the format you're using for it?
Well, there are two basic formats. One is the format for a theatrical script, which is very, very different from what you would use for an audiovisual script, with the video down one side of the page and the audio down the other side of the page. That's the way a typical audiovisual script would be written. Whereas the motion picture for a Hollywood production or a TV video is a totally different format. And the two are two different ways of writing that you would have to, adjust for what you're doing. Because with a theatrical film, you've got to explain what's going on and tell the director what you would expect to have happening. Whereas with an AV script, I'm doing it myself. I don't need to know those things because it's all in my head. So it's just a much easier script to write.
Is an AV script like a shooting script? Is that what they would call it? Okay.
Yeah.
So that has like this shot, that shot, how to do this on this word. And okay.
Right. And then have on one side of the page, and then on the other side of the page, you have the narration that would go along with it, what they're saying.
Okay, I have to look those up. I haven't seen a script that's formatted like that. I've seen shooting scripts, but it's usually the ones I've seen were mixed into it. I've just started doing script writing.
Okay.
I like it because it's so stripped down from prose writing or novel writing that it's exciting when you find something different that you thought before, when I had a book and somebody's like, you need to get a script for this book. And I go, why do you need a script for it? You have the book. It's all right there. Just make a movie on the book. And then I didn't realize how much thought and time goes into writing a script to be able to transfer those ideas into directions or suggestions for a director.
Yeah. Very, very different.
So I'll look that up, the AV script, and see how that's formatted. It's the way I'm writing it now. I think it's a little bit of a mix between a shooting script and a theatrical script, because I'm not using one of those programs to do it. I'm just doing it in Word in Word. So I'm just formatting it myself, because I was trying to use one of those softwares, and then I realized I didn't understand the language it was talking. Like I need to figure out what all that stuff means before I can use this thing that puts it where it needs to go.
I understand. I agree with you. It is a whole different language, and you've got to learn the language before you can make yourself understood.
So are you still doing script writing now, or have you left that with your financial stuff, or what's taking up most of your time?
I haven't done a script for 30 years. Okay. Haven't needed to, because I'm not into that. But recently I dug out a motion picture script that I wrote back in the late 70s, early 80s, and looked at it again, and hey, this isn't too bad. Let's see if we can't revise it, make it happen. So now that I'm getting involved in publishing and all that sort of stuff and have new contacts, I think I will probably be marketing this antique script revised for the current day and see what sort of a market there might be for it.
I mean, those 80s things are coming back around, and the high-waisted jeans are back in style. I thought that was done in high school for me. So,
Well,
That's
depending upon your physical attributes, it may never be done.
mm. Mm, mm, mm. So then, what is taking up most of your time these days? What's the last writing project you've been working on? What are you doing right now?
Well, let's step back to the 90s. Okay.
Okay.
When I first got into financial planning, I wound up managing a group of sales folks in the Midwest. And in the 90s, if you recall, if you're old enough, we carried a pager, okay, and a
Mm,
pocket full of quarters and tried to find a payphone to return the calls. Well, all of my people had email, it was brand new, but nobody ever paid any attention to it. And I needed for them to at least check their emails to find out what's going on. So I started sending out a thought for the day, Monday through Friday, typically humorous, sometimes inspirational. And it worked. They started reading their emails and they started sharing some of this humorous stuff with their clients. And the clients thought, that's fine. It's always nice to make somebody laugh. And could we get on that list? And there's no postage on emails. So why not? And that was 32 years ago. And today I'm still sending out a thought for the day, Monday through Friday, to people all over the US. I've got readers in Europe. I've got readers, as a matter of fact, a reader in Australia just sent me a suggestion for an article. Got readers in Asia. And with all these things in my files, when the discourse in the US here started getting so divisive a couple years ago and everybody's yelling, you're wrong, I'm right, this isn't the way it should be, that's the way it should be. I said, people need to laugh more. So I took some of these things to a publisher and said, this might make a good book. And they slapped me upside the head and said, no, this would not make a good book. This would make a good series of books. You probably got 10 or 12 volumes here. And so the first volume came out January 1st, 20 years of internet humor. And I say 20 years, even though I've been doing it for 30, because all of the first 10 years are in computers that I don't have anymore. I didn't save the thoughts because I didn't know I was going to need them. And so I'm just using the last 20 years. But that's what I'm working on right now is, getting the next volume ready to go. It should be ready to go to the publisher in the next week or so. But then I'm also sending out a thought for the day, Monday through Friday. And so I love getting these things and editing them down and making them even more interesting than they were when I got them into my hand.
What's an appropriate length for a thought of a day?
I have some that are one sentence, and I have some that go on for 3 or 4 pages. There is no perfect length. It's, what is it? The one that has gotten some of the best comments is a picture of this darling little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, in prayer. And the caption is, "Dear Lord, please send some clothes for those ladies on Grandpa's computer."
It's good. Where do you do most of your writing? Is it out in the world and then you take a note of it? Or if you're doing pages of it, certainly you got to sit down and put some thought into it, maybe even some pre-writing.
In all seriousness, what I primarily do is when I'm sitting right here at the computer doing it right now. Okay. Instead of talking, I'm typing. But yeah, I've got looking around the office right now, I see about 6 different yellow pads that all have different notes on them for different things. And on behind me is another computer with all sorts of other notes on them for financial planning and for my clients over there. So no, I don't do too much out on the field anymore. But thinking back in 2005, I took my 2 daughters on a trip from Ohio out to the West Coast because they'd never seen the Grand Canyon and some of the great things out there. And I wrote a thought for the day every day while we were on the road. And that was one of the most popular series that I ever included because it was just all firsthand experiences of what's going on. And I'd love to do it again.
were you, with the thought of the day when you're on the road, did you sit down at the end of the day and think about it? Or was it something that during the day, if a thought came up, you'd write that down, and then at the end of the day, you just pick from a thought or two, or maybe more, and say, this is the one for today that is going to go in the collection?
All of the above. Okay. Most of the ones while we were on the road was basically a documentary where one girl said this and one girl said that, and they were absolutely astounded by whatever it was. I did one just on the hassles of trying to send out an email when you're on the road. Now, this is, 25 years ago, where the availability of Wi-Fi was not nearly as extensive as it is today. And one of the problems was a lot of hotels and all had, free Wi-Fi. But when you got the free Wi-Fi, you discovered it was a dial-up service, which didn't work all that well. And some of the ones that said free Wi-Fi, and it was real Wi-Fi, had some software that if you were not a member or a client at the hotel, it would burn out your phone. And I lost 3 phones on that trip because I was trying to make use of Wi-Fi at a place I wasn't signed up for. Fortunately, that all has gone away. So free Wi-Fi is very, very common these days. But back then, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah, that was when we were traveling around the US. That was one of the big things, was how do we keep our internet connectivity, because some places didn't have, it's before Starlink, and you wouldn't have cell service. So you'd have your Garmin or whatever for your traveling, but you didn't have a cell service otherwise for checking anything for work.
Right.
Have you been to Mount Rushmore?
I have not been to Mount Rushmore. Yes, I have been to the Dakotas, but I have not visited that place. Whenever I've been in that area, I was on a time frame, and I'd love to stop, but I just don't have time. I have been to all 49 states on the continent.
Yeah, we've done that. We've done the 48 contiguous, and then we flew up to Alaska and Hawaii after the dogs were gone. But it's strange. You look at Mount Rushmore in the pictures of it, speaking of photography, you think, wow, look at that grand thing. That's huge. And the only thing I had to compare it to was like Stone Mountain in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing that when I was a kid, I haven't seen that as an adult. So I don't know how well it's like my perspective of it now. But when we got to Mount Rushmore, it was a little disappointing, because you're like expecting this huge thing, and it's just this little piece on the mountain, and you go, that's it? Huh. But then I remember going to the Grand Canyon and thinking, well, this isn't going to be, I mean, what's this going to be? And then getting there and looking at that and going, oh, okay.
Oh
I
my
get it.
God. Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
My first thought to that when I saw the Grand Canyon was just imagining the pioneer coming through the pine forest and getting up and looking, how the hell am I going to get across that?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think that was probably, of the stuff we've seen in all our travels. I mean, we've done the stuff on Route 66 too, the Cadillacs buried halfway in the ground and the largest ball of twine.
Yeah, it's right outside of Amarillo, Texas.
Yeah. The Grand Canyon is probably the one that is the most like that. And then realizing how high the high plains are, and just the geography of the country, where coming from Virginia, I mean, I knew about mountains, and I think the Appalachian Mountains are steeper than the Rocky Mountains, but they're not as tall. So you get a different feel driving through, the Smoky Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, than you do going over Donner Pass, and you're on a 25-mile downgrade, and you go, wow, that's a long way to drive downhill. We must be pretty high. And then driving through through
Or
Texas.
uphill, as the case may be.
Yeah, yeah. Driving through Texas in the snow, or just at night going from Texas to New Mexico to Arizona, and you go, wow, this is really up high. And it's just, that was one of the worst ice storms we've been in, where just everything was wrecking and there was nowhere to go. Trucks were just stopped on the interstate, just in the lane. It's like everybody was like, no, we'll just try this again in the morning. We'll shut this down. But yeah, traveling across the US, definitely a great way to see the country driving around.
Well, I
And
have made the coast to coast trip many times, and far would rather drive than fly, I got to tell you, because you see so much. And one of my favorite places out there, for personal reasons, is right outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. There's a town that was known as the gateway to the Grand Canyon. And they even built a railroad from Williams, Arizona, up to the Grand Canyon. And I went to Williams, Arizona, and discovered that the main street is Bill Williams Boulevard. There's this big statue downtown with a big guy with a beard. And I felt very much at home out there.
wow, very nice. Very nice. Yeah, it's strange in Arizona. Just you can be in the desert one minute and then up in the mountains with snow the next, an hour from then.
Well, my father-in-law had a curio shop in Tombstone, Arizona, right next to the OK Corral.
I like Tombstone.
And my wife and I went out to a conference in Phoenix one July, and it was 106 in Phoenix. And she was bouncing around in, short shorts. And I said, you've never been to the Grand Canyon, so why don't we take a day and just drive up to the Grand Canyon? So we took the day, got up to Flagstaff, went into the Grand Canyon, and snow was blowing sideways. And she was up there in shorts, and it wasn't really what she was expecting, but it sure was pretty.
Yeah. Wow. Tombstone. We were in an RV when we did our travels around the US, and we stayed at the RV park just off of the end of whatever the main street is. This was probably 2012, 2013 timeframe. And I thought, because there was a couple places for rent, like apartments for rent. And I was like, man, I could probably be all right living in Tombstone for a week or two. I did think about renting a place. But yeah, it's the OK Corral is not what I thought it was going to be. It's just a lot. And
a corral.
Yeah. We did pay in one of the saloons on that main street. Where we ate, we paid with dollar coins, and everybody's dressed up like, period. And there was a cowboy that was the waiter, and I could swear I saw a little tear in his eye when I paid with a small sack of dollar coins. Like, it really took him back. It was like we were really embracing this whole Tombstone thing. It's pretty good.
No, I thoroughly enjoy travel. I enjoy it immensely.
Well, then, besides the 80s film that you might bring back, what other creative ventures are you doing right now?
Well, other than this book series right now, I'm looking forward to getting it finished, because I have a couple of books that are in my head right now. But one of them I've tentatively entitled Tales from the Swamp, based upon my 20 years of being a government contractor in DC. And you were from Richmond. I was down in Richmond in the 70s and 80s. I was on the board of directors of the Virginia Aviation Museum, because aviation history is one of my things that I thoroughly enjoy doing. And I was helped get that thing started. Back
Is that the one that by the airport with they had the Blackbird for a little while?
Yes. And I was on the board of directors, and they said, we got this offer from the Science Museum of Virginia, and they would like to take us over. And I said, don't do it. I mean, that would be the kiss of death for the museum. And so they did it anyway, and I'm no longer on the board of directors at that point. And Sure enough, it's not there anymore. They
Yeah.
said, we're going to use this building for something else. Take all your planes and take them away. So it's now in Fredericksburg, I think.
Yeah, I've been to that when back then when it was there and it had the Blackbird, and I don't know if that's the reason I pursued the pilot's license, but it certainly played a part in it in my younger mind of flying and things. So yeah.
Growing up
Wow.
on an Air Force base, I got my pilot's license in high school. And I will have to say, I have not flown as pilot in command in at least 60 years,
Mm.
but it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah. Our lives, like we were in Virginia before when I was getting the pilot's license, and then my wife got transferred out to the West Coast. So we went out there, and I finished and got the private pilot single engine land VFR.
PASEL.
Yeah. And that was the last time I flew, was when I got the license with doing that check ride. So it's, man, it took a long time to get, and it was
Well, when I
definitely
was
an
on an Air
expensive
Force
hobby.
base and part of the Air Force Aero Club, I could rent a plane for $750 an hour, including fuel. Try to do that today.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it'll be 750 an hour,
Yeah.
depending on your plane. Yeah. Wow. Was that a Cessna or a Cub?
Cessna
Or,
172, 175.
okay, that's the same
We
thing.
we had two Tri-Pacers, two 172s, a 150, a 175, a T-34, an L-20, and an L-17, and part of the club.
Wow. Okay. I looked at getting part of like joining the Civil Air Patrol, just
Mhm.
as a way of this. Maybe I can get some flight time and not have to pay so much. But that didn't work out because we got transferred, and I was going to try to fly for the state. That was my purpose, was to be a pilot for the state police, and I just didn't. We left in 2012, so I didn't have the time to finish it out. But wow. Yeah, flying definitely changes your perspective on things. And I wondered, like after the first few flights, why everybody didn't have a pilot's license. Why didn't you get your driver's license and then get your pilot's license? Because it made you such a better observer. Like you're looking for things, you're on a different dimension. You've got the added "I'm going to fall out of the sky" thing. So it's not like you're just driving down a road, but it's when I started doing those flights by yourself, that's when it started to sink in, where you're like, oh, okay, this is why people don't do it, because you put yourself in a position where if you don't complete this series of events, you're going to die. It's not like you're in a car and you could just stop on the side of the road if you thought you had enough, or stop walking. This is, you're in the air, and in order to get back down on the ground and live, you have to do this series of things. So I was like, oh,
Plan
that's why
ahead.
everybody doesn't have it. Yeah.
Plan ahead.
Aviate, navigate, communicate. What a great little thing to learn and to use in other parts of your life too. Hmm. Well then, given your experience, we'll maybe wind up with a small question like this, which is, what do you think the reason for living is?
To make a difference. One of my goals is to encourage people to start their day with a smile and laugh. Everybody needs to laugh occasionally. And that's what I send my thought for the day out, so that I send it out at 10 o'clock at night, so that when people wake up in the morning, they can turn on their computer or look at their phone and find something to start the day with a smile. And hopefully it'll get better from there, as opposed to death scrolling on the local news and finding all the things that are going wrong with the world. Hey, start with a smile.
It's very nice. I like that. What's the best way for people to follow your work and be able to get copies of your writing?
Well, they can sign up for my thought for the day. Basically, all it takes is going to my website, www.internet-humor.com, and sign up for it. It's free, doesn't cost anything. And if they wanted to buy a book, they can buy the book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Books a Million or any place you go to buy books. It's out just about every place. It's available on ebook format, and it's also available in hard copy. 20 years of internet humor.
Very nice. I have that link that's going to be in the show notes, as well as your wgwilliams.com. Are you still using that one? Is that a good one to
I
send
am.
people to?
That tells the stuff before the book. Okay. That
Okay.
tells what I was doing in Washington and, the types of projects that I worked on. I did a lot in the disaster area with FEMA, and before that, the Federal Disaster Assistance Administration. As a matter of fact, I was the first director of news and information for FEMA when it was first created. And I was the voice for the response for 3 Mile Island and Mount St. Helens and things of that nature, the Cuban refugee boat lift. And that was undoubtedly the best job or assignment that I've ever had. I thoroughly enjoyed that work.
Wow. With the St. Helens, did you go out to the scene of that? Have you been to that place?
I have not been to that since the eruption. I've been out there before that, but I had some other people that I was able to send out there because we had enough going on in Washington that I couldn't get away, although I would have loved to have done it.
We were last out there because, as I said, my wife got transferred to the West Coast. We started out in Tacoma and then went down to Vancouver and Salem for some years. And going out to St. Helens, the day we went out there, it was cloudy, so you couldn't see the whole mountain. It cleared up for a minute and you could see it. And they have I guess it's like a museum welcome center or whatever on the side of the mountain. And just seeing that of how the mountain like swole up before it happened, and then how it did the flows of the land, and then going through some of the lava tubes around those places. I was surprised coming from Virginia, where things like you go to the Ray Caverns and they have, it seemed like a safer tour than going into the lava tubes. Like I couldn't believe they'd let you go into the lava tubes, which is, there's not active lava. It's just where lava flowed underground. And they're giant. You walk down a scaffolding that I think is dubious. And then you get into the tube. There's no lights. So you bring your own lights. And then you walk, I think it was about a mile or so. You could walk all the way to the end, which we got to the end of it where we were crawling a little. And then I was like, this is crazy. Let's not do this anymore. Let's go back. And, but it's amazing. Like the Wild West in many cases was the Wild West. Like just walking down the street in Salem, they would have these areas for rain runoff, and it's right by the sidewalk, but it's about a 4-foot hole. And all that's around it is a little curbing. There's no fence or anything. And I felt like in Virginia, we'd have a fence around that, or at least a sign that said, watch out for this. But then you go to California, like to the rest stops, and they have a speed bump before and after the spot, and then signs that say, do this, don't do that. And I was like, oh, we got extreme nanny state going on down here, but in Oregon and Washington, which seem to be a little bit opposite on things. Like Washington, don't mess with anything on the beach. No bonfires or anything like that. Oregon, yeah, you can move all that you want, all that driftwood, go ahead and burn it. You know, it's the mindsets are different as you go across the US. And just thinking back on traveling across all the states, of just how the geography changed, and how when you were in the Badlands, you're like, wow, this really does look like something you'd call the Badlands. And then you get into the plains and driving through Wyoming, all these other places, and you go, wow, this must be why they divided the states up kind of how they did because of these terrain features. But what a great way to see everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Far better way to see it by driving through it than flying over it.
But with St. Helens, how long of a response was it? Like, how long was that a big story back then? I don't remember all of it.
Thinking back to that, it was probably about 3 to 4 weeks.
Hmm.
And it went on from that point on, but it wasn't, the major news event from that point on.
Yeah, it's strange depending on where you are in the U.S. Certainly, it had the same effect in the world too, as far as news goes. If you're on the East Coast, you think about that for a little while, and then, like, I don't think the West Coast concerns themselves too much with hurricanes, but the East Coast, definitely hurricanes is a bigger deal. So it's strange. The world's small, but it's still big.
That's true.
All right, so I have those websites and links in the show notes for people that are interested in them. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts you have in closing?
I got lots of thoughts, but I think we probably covered everything that is appropriate for this. Uh, and I can't think of anything that's terribly important, that I'd like to have added off the top of my head.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. As I said, the links are in the show notes, and I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Very good.